The sun rose over the golden sands of the Nile Valley, its first rays piercing through the mist and illuminating the ancient ruins that had stood silent for millennia. In the heart of the Egyptian desert, beyond the bustling cities and crowded markets, a forgotten tomb waited, untouched since the fall of a once mighty kingdom. For thousands of years, shifting sands had hidden its secrets, concealing stories of kings and queens, of betrayals and sacrifices, of power and ambition. But now, in the year 1922, a team of archaeologists led by the determined and relentless Dr. Evelyn Carter stood at the threshold of discovery. Evelyn's heart pounded as she brushed the sweat from her forehead. She had spent years studying fragments of ancient texts, tracing lost maps, and following rumors whispered among Bedouin tribes. Her obsession had brought her here, to the Valley of the Kings. Beside her, Ahmed Hassan, a skilled local historian, knelt in the sand, carefully translating inscriptions carved into a weathered stone tablet. "This is it," he said softly, his voice trembling. "The markings, they speak of a forgotten pharaoh. One whose name was erased from every record." Evelyn's breath caught. Erased? In ancient Egypt, to erase a name was to condemn a soul to eternal oblivion. "Why would they hide him?" she whispered. Ahmed hesitated before replying. "Because, his reign ended in blood." The wind howled through the valley, lifting grains of sand into the air, as if the desert itself was warning them to turn back. Yet Evelyn stepped forward, drawn by an unexplainable force. The narrow entrance to the tomb had been carved into the cliffside, its edges barely visible beneath centuries of sand and rock. She knelt, running her fingers along the symbols etched into the stone. "The Eternal One who walks in shadow," she translated aloud. Ahmed's face paled. "That is not a name I have ever seen before." They exchanged a silent glance. This was no ordinary tomb. The workers began clearing the entrance, their tools clinking against stone as dust filled the air. With each passing hour, Evelyn felt the weight of history pressing down on her. She imagined the men and women who had once stood here 3,000 years ago, slaves, soldiers, priests, watching as a king was entombed with his treasures, his power, and, perhaps his darkest secrets. Finally, as the last stone was pried free, the entrance revealed itself, a narrow passageway descending deep into the earth. The air that escaped was stale and heavy, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and decay. Evelyn lit her lantern. "Stay close," she whispered to Ahmed. Together, they stepped inside. The walls were covered in elaborate carvings depicting scenes of war and ritual, gods and mortals intertwined in battles of power and faith. Hieroglyphics told of a pharaoh who rose from obscurity, who defied the priesthood, and who commanded armies that stretched from the Nile Delta to the Red Sea. But something about the carvings was unsettling. In each depiction, the pharaoh's face was deliberately scratched away. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What did he do?" she murmured. Ahmed ran his fingers across the damaged stone. "Whatever it was," he said gravely, "his enemies wanted us to forget he ever existed." Deeper and deeper they ventured until they reached a massive stone door, sealed tight with ancient mortar. Above it, an inscription warned, "Disturb not the eternal sleeper, lest the shadows awaken." Evelyn hesitated. "Do you believe in curses?" she asked quietly. Ahmed gave a small, uneasy smile. "I believe in history." With a nod, the workers set to work. Hours later, the stone door groaned open. A gust of trapped air escaped, extinguishing several lanterns. Inside, the chamber lay frozen in time, golden statues, alabaster jars, delicate scrolls, and a sarcophagus unlike any Evelyn had ever seen. It was carved from obsidian, its surface smooth and black as night, reflecting their trembling lantern light. Hieroglyphs spiraled across its surface, and though Evelyn could not read them fully, one phrase stood out. "The king who defied the gods." She reached out, her fingertips hovering just above the stone. Suddenly, Ahmed grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he whispered. "Look." In the corner of the chamber lay something unexpected, a small clay tablet, cracked and faded, but still legible. Ahmed picked it up carefully and began to read aloud. "To those who open this tomb, know that his power was not buried with him. The words echoed in the chamber, and for a moment, no one moved. Evelyn swallowed hard. This was more than a discovery. This was the beginning of something far greater. And far more dangerous. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the Valley of the Kings fell into shadow. But inside the tomb, the secrets of a forgotten pharaoh had just begun to stir. The flickering lantern light cast eerie shadows across the chamber walls, making the carved gods and long-forgotten soldiers seem alive. Evelyn Carter's breath trembled as she stared at the obsidian sarcophagus. It wasn't just its size or its unusual material, it was the silence around it, the weight of something unsaid lingering in the stale air. Ahmed Hassan knelt beside the cracked clay tablet, reading the ancient hieroglyphs again and again. He finally whispered, "Evelyn, this isn't a warning. It's a message. Someone wanted us to know the king's power was unnatural." Evelyn frowned. "Unnatural how?" Ahmed hesitated, glancing at the workers still examining golden relics around the room. "There are records," he continued softly, "from the reign of Seti II, mentioning a pharaoh who rose to power without divine blessing. A ruler who angered the priesthood so deeply that they erased his name from existence." Evelyn's hand brushed the obsidian surface, feeling its coldness seep into her skin. "If the gods rejected him," she murmured, "what did he do to earn their wrath?" Before Ahmed could answer, a loud crack echoed through the chamber. Everyone froze. One of the workers, a young man named Youssef, had accidentally knocked over a small alabaster jar. Its shattered remains spilled something unusual across the floor, a dark, resin-like substance, hardened by millennia. Evelyn crouched down, examining it carefully. "This isn't embalming fluid," she muttered. "It's something else." Ahmed's eyes widened. "There are ancient writings," he whispered, "about a forbidden ritual, a way for a ruler to live beyond death. They called it the right of eternal breath." Evelyn shot him a sharp look. "Are you saying this pharaoh tried to make himself immortal?" Ahmed nodded slowly. "But the ritual was dangerous. It required sacrifices, hundreds, maybe thousands. If it failed, it cursed the soul instead of preserving it." The thought sent shivers crawling up Evelyn's spine. Suddenly, one of the older workers, Abdul Rahman, cleared his throat. "My grandfather," he said hesitantly, "used to tell stories about this place. The Bedouins call it Qabr al-Ana, the tomb of the accursed. They say anyone who enters without permission never returns." Evelyn tried to dismiss it, but the unease in her chest deepened. The group gathered around the obsidian sarcophagus. Its carvings depicted a figure standing before the gods, holding an ankh in one hand and a curved khopesh sword in the other. Behind him, chaos raged, burning temples, fleeing priests, and soldiers kneeling in submission. This king, Ahmed whispered, was no ordinary ruler. He defied the priests, defied the gods, and yet, here he rests, surrounded by treasures instead of being erased from memory completely. Evelyn stepped closer to the sarcophagus, tracing the spiraling hieroglyphs. She recognized one repeated phrase, "the one who breathes in shadow." Before she could interpret its meaning, a sudden gust of air rushed through the chamber, extinguishing half the lanterns. The group startled, and for a moment, the oppressive silence became unbearable. "Seal the entrance behind us," Evelyn ordered, trying to steady her voice. If a sandstorm hit, they couldn't afford for centuries of delicate artifacts to be ruined. Hours passed as they catalogued relics, gold amulets, scrolls sealed in clay, and statues of falcons, jackals, and cobras. Yet the further they explored, the more unsettling the findings became. They discovered fragments of papyrus showing gruesome sacrifices, depictions of priests kneeling before an altar, while a crowned figure held a ceremonial blade. Ahmed grew pale. "These aren't just burial texts," he murmured. "These are confessions." Evelyn glanced at him. "Confessions?" Ahmed nodded. "The priests must have kept records of what this king demanded. I think they obeyed him out of fear." As he pieced together the damaged inscriptions, a name slowly emerged, Pharaoh Neferhotep IV. Evelyn repeated it under her breath. Neferhotep IV. The name was absent from every history book, erased from monuments, wiped from temple walls, and yet, here it was, hidden deep beneath the sands. "Evelyn," Ahmed said carefully, "I think we've just uncovered the most dangerous secret in Egyptian history." Before she could respond, Yusuf called out from the far corner of the chamber. "Dr. Carter. You need to see this." They hurried over. On the wall, half buried beneath plaster, was a massive mural, one that had survived untouched. It depicted Neferhotep IV standing beside a hooded figure, draped in black, holding a scroll covered in glowing hieroglyphs. Beneath it, another inscription read, "Those who follow the shadows shall inherit eternity." Evelyn felt a chill crawl across her skin. This wasn't just rebellion, she whispered. This was something else. Something darker. Ahmed's voice lowered. What if Neferhotep wasn't just defying the priests? What if he was making a deal? Evelyn stared at the mural. With the treasures they had uncovered, their discovery would change history forever. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had opened something far greater than a tomb. And far more dangerous. The chamber fell silent once more, the air heavy with secrets buried for 3,000 years. Then, from somewhere deep within the passageways beyond, they heard it. A faint sound. Stone grinding against stone. Evelyn froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ahmed nodded slowly, his lantern trembling in his hand. "Something's moving," he said quietly. The workers exchanged nervous glances. And as the sound grew louder, they realized with dawning horror, it was coming from behind the sealed stone door they hadn't opened yet. The grinding sound echoed faintly through the dark corridor, deep and deliberate, as if a massive stone slab was shifting somewhere far beneath the tomb. Evelyn Carter held her breath. The flicker of her lantern trembled in her hand, casting distorted shadows across the carvings on the walls. Ahmed's jaw tightened as he stepped closer to the sealed passage. "Something's behind there," he whispered, his voice tight with tension. The workers, now visibly nervous, began murmuring prayers under their breath. Abdul Rahman, the eldest among them, touched the amulet around his neck. "This is a warning," he said in a low voice. The tomb was sealed for a reason. Evelyn swallowed hard but forced herself to stay composed. "We've come this far," she said softly. "We can't turn back now." Ahmed shot her a worried glance but nodded. The air inside the chamber felt heavier than before, thicker, almost suffocating. As the sound faded, the silence returned, stretching uncomfortably between them. Finally, Evelyn raised her lantern and approached the second sealed door. Unlike the entrance, this one bore no signs of being touched for millennia. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, hieroglyphics depicting priests kneeling in fear before a towering figure wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Ahmed brushed his fingertips against the engravings. "These aren't victory carvings," he murmured. "They're warnings." Evelyn leaned closer to read an inscription carved deep into the stone. "Let the shadows rest, for their vengeance is eternal." Her heart pounded in her chest. "Ahmed," she whispered, "what if we're not meant to open this?" Before he could answer, Yusuf, the young worker who had discovered the first mural, interrupted. "Dr. Carter," he said, pointing to the corner of the door, "there's a mechanism here." Sure enough, beneath a layer of dust and sand, a carved panel revealed 3 pressure plates. Evelyn crouched down, tracing their shapes. "This is unusual," she said. The Egyptians rarely used locking mechanisms like this unless they wanted to keep something contained. Ahmed inhaled sharply. "Contained," he repeated. "Not protected." Evelyn looked up at him, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she straightened and addressed the team. "Clear the area. I need space." The workers stepped back, their faces pale. Evelyn placed her palm on the first pressure plate. It sank slightly beneath her hand, releasing a low rumble. Then she pressed the second, then the third. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a deep, resonant grind, the massive stone slab began to shift. A sharp gust of air burst from the opening, extinguishing half their lanterns and filling the chamber with the dry, choking scent of ancient dust. The passage beyond yawned open, revealing a long, narrow corridor leading into darkness. Ahmed hesitated. "Evelyn, we don't know what's in there." She tightened her grip on the lantern. "That's exactly why we need to find out." Slowly, they stepped forward. The corridor walls were smoother here, polished obsidian lined with gold inscriptions. Scenes unfolded along the way, depictions of a ritual unlike any Evelyn had ever seen. A circle of hooded priests stood around a central figure, the same unknown pharaoh, Neferhotep IV. They rushed back into the main chamber where Abdul Rahman stood clutching his lantern. "The desert is waking," the old man whispered. "The spirits know we are here." Ignoring his words, Evelyn climbed the steps leading back toward the upper chamber. The workers who had been stationed near the entrance stumbled down to meet her, panic in their voices. Above him, an image of the sky showed strange symbols, eclipses, constellations, and a black sun. Ahmed studied the carvings carefully. "This is astronomical alignment," he muttered. They performed the ritual on a night when the stars matched these exact positions. Evelyn tilted her lantern to see the next panel. Her stomach tightened. The images showed rows of prisoners, men, women, and even children, kneeling before the altar. Each one held a small golden emblem in their hands. She turned to Ahmed. "These aren't sacrifices for the gods," she said quietly. "They're sacrifices for him." Ahmed's face was pale as he nodded slowly. They moved deeper into the passage until it finally opened into a vast underground chamber. The room was unlike anything they had seen before. Columns carved from black granite rose high above, supporting a domed ceiling inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli. The center of the chamber held a massive circular platform, surrounded by ancient scrolls and ceremonial objects. And at the very center, a second sarcophagus. This one, smaller than the first, was carved entirely from gold, its surface covered in more inscriptions. Evelyn approached slowly, running her fingers across the delicate carvings. "It's untouched," she whispered. Ahmed knelt beside her, tracing one particular line of hieroglyphics. "It says, 'The Heart of Shadows.'" Evelyn frowned. "The heart?" Ahmed nodded. In Egyptian belief, the heart contained the essence of the soul. "If this is separate from the body..." He trailed off. Evelyn stepped back, realization dawning. "Ahmed," she said softly, "the body in the obsidian sarcophagus upstairs, it might be empty." The weight of her words hung heavy in the silence. Suddenly, the faint grinding sound returned. But this time, it came from above them. Yusuf ran into the chamber, his face pale with panic. "Dr. Carter," he gasped. The workers outside, they heard something moving under the sands. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "Moving?" Yusuf nodded frantically. "Like stone shifting, and voices. Whispering." Ahmed grabbed his lantern and scanned the chamber walls, searching for clues. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "This tomb, it's more than just a burial site. It's a trap. A prison." But Evelyn hesitated. She looked back at the golden sarcophagus. If what Ahmed suspected was true, this wasn't just history. It was something much bigger. And something dangerous was still waiting to be uncovered. As the grinding above grew louder, Evelyn made her choice. "We're not leaving," she said firmly. "Not yet." Ahmed stared at her, stunned. "Evelyn." "If Neferhotep's power wasn't buried with him," she interrupted, "then we need to understand what we're dealing with, before it's too late." The chamber fell silent again, except for the distant rumble. Unseen forces had been set in motion. And deep beneath the sands of Egypt, after 3,000 years of silence, something was waking. The distant rumble above grew louder, like thunder rolling beneath the desert sands. Dust drifted from the ceiling, falling in slow, delicate spirals, as if the tomb itself was breathing. Evelyn Carter tightened her grip on the lantern, her knuckles pale. Ahmed, she whispered, this entire place feels alive. Ahmed glanced around the golden chamber, his expression tense. It's not alive, he said softly, it's reacting. Something we've done has triggered it. The others, Yusuf, Abdul Rahman, and the remaining workers, huddled near the entrance of the room, their fear palpable. The oppressive silence that followed each rumble only made their anxiety grow. Evelyn moved toward the golden sarcophagus at the center of the chamber, kneeling to examine the inscriptions again. Her fingers brushed across the delicate hieroglyphs, pausing at one particularly deep carving. Ahmed, she called, her voice low but urgent, come look at this. He crouched beside her, peering at the symbols under the trembling glow of the lantern. It says, Ahmed translated slowly, the heart was taken from the king, sealed away so his power would be divided. Evelyn looked up sharply. So his body is above, but his heart is here? Ahmed nodded grimly. And if the two are ever reunited, he hesitated, lowering his voice. Then his curse becomes whole. The implications settled over them like a shroud. Yusuf stepped closer, clutching his pickaxe nervously. Dr. Carter, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, maybe we should leave it. Seal the chamber. Forget we were ever here. Evelyn stood, her lantern light catching the golden sheen of the sarcophagus. You don't understand, she said firmly. If this is real, if Neferhotep's power was divided, then we've just uncovered evidence of something Egyptologists have debated for centuries. The lost rites of immortality weren't myths. They were real. Ahmed placed a hand on her shoulder. Evelyn, he said carefully, we came here to uncover history, not to awaken it. Before she could respond, a sharp, hollow crack echoed from the corridor behind them. Everyone froze. The sound came again, deliberate, rhythmic, like footsteps on ancient stone. Abdul Rahman clutched his amulet and began whispering prayers. Evelyn raised a hand, signaling for silence. The footsteps grew louder. But then, they stopped. The corridor fell silent again, save for the faint whistle of air moving through the passageways. Finally, Evelyn took a deep breath. Stay here, she said quietly. Ahmed's eyes widened. You're not going out there alone. Together, they stepped cautiously into the corridor, their lanterns casting long shadows along the polished obsidian walls. The silence was suffocating. They reached the intersection where the narrow hallway branched deeper into the tomb. Evelyn raised her lantern, sweeping its light along the path. Nothing. She exhaled slowly, beginning to turn back, when she noticed something carved into the floor. A spiral pattern. Faint, shallow, and almost completely hidden beneath the dust. Ahmed knelt, brushing the sand away. It's a sigil, he whispered. A protective seal. This wasn't meant to be walked upon. Evelyn frowned. Protective against what? Before Ahmed could answer, another tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. From somewhere above, a deep, hollow thud echoed through the tomb. This time, they weren't the only ones who heard it. Yusuf appeared at the corridor entrance, his face pale. The workers outside, he cried. They're shouting, the sands are moving. Evelyn and Ahmed exchanged a look. The dunes are collapsing, one of them said breathlessly. It's like the earth is swallowing itself. Evelyn pushed past them, reaching the threshold of the tomb's outer hall. There, she froze. Through the narrow opening at the top of the stairway, the night sky above the Valley of the Kings glowed faintly, not from fire or torchlight, but from a strange, pale luminescence. Ahmed stepped up beside her, following her gaze. The wind outside howled violently, carrying with it a sharp, dry heat. What is that? He whispered. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed from the depths of the tomb below. They turned sharply. Yusuf, still near the golden sarcophagus, screamed as the floor beneath him cracked slightly, sending tiny shards of stone scattering. Evelyn sprinted down the stairs, Ahmed close behind her. Yusuf, she called. He was trembling, pointing at the sarcophagus. It moved, he stammered. I swear, it shifted on its own. Evelyn crouched to inspect it. The golden lid had indeed shifted slightly, just enough to expose a faint gap. From within, a faint metallic hum resonated, almost imperceptible, like the vibration of trapped energy. Ahmed's breath caught. "This isn't just a burial chamber," he whispered. "It's a containment vault." Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she brushed her fingers across the edge of the lid. The hum grew louder, more insistent. Then, without warning, a sharp burst of air shot out from the gap, extinguishing the nearest lanterns and plunging half the chamber into darkness. Panic rippled through the group as several workers scrambled toward the corridor. "Seal it!" Abdul Rahman shouted. "We must seal it before it wakes." Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. "No one touches it." The room fell silent again, save for the deep, steady thrum emanating from the sarcophagus. Ahmed turned to Evelyn, his voice low. "Evelyn, whatever's inside, it's still active." Her breath was unsteady, but her voice was resolute. "Then we need answers," she said. She glanced at the inscriptions along the platform surrounding the sarcophagus, her eyes scanning quickly. "They hid his heart here," she murmured, separated from his body to prevent him from returning. "If we open this, Ahmed, we might undo what they died trying to stop." Ahmed's gaze hardened. "Then we leave it sealed," he said firmly. But Evelyn hesitated. She looked back at the golden box, the hum growing louder with every heartbeat. And then she said quietly, "Or we finally learn the truth." Above them, the sands continued to shift. The Valley of the Kings trembled. And deep below, something ancient and forgotten stirred, something that had waited 3,000 years for this moment. The turning point had begun, and there was no going back. The chamber grew colder, as if the tomb itself had exhaled. Evelyn's lantern trembled in her hands, its golden glow flickering against the obsidian sarcophagus. Ahmed stood frozen, his lips silently forming words he dared not speak. The air felt heavier now. It carried something ancient, a presence that had waited for millennia. Evelyn drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ahmed, this is it. Whatever they tried to hide for 3,000 years, it's inside." Ahmed hesitated, his hand brushing the edge of the cracked clay tablet they'd found earlier. The message haunted him. Know that his power was not buried with him. A faint rumble echoed through the stone walls. Dust rained down from above. Somewhere deep within the tomb, a hidden mechanism stirred. Evelyn took a cautious step closer to the sarcophagus. Her fingertips brushed across the spiraling hieroglyphs etched into the obsidian surface. Her breath caught when she noticed a repeated symbol, a falcon with its wings bound in chains. Ahmed's eyes widened. "That's the Forbidden Seal." It was used by the high priests of Ammonius to bind a pharaoh's spirit when they believed he defied the gods. Evelyn swallowed hard. So this wasn't a burial, this was imprisonment. The weight of her words sank into the silence. Finally, with the help of the workers, they removed the golden clasps and heaved the heavy lid open. A rush of stale air escaped, carrying the faint scent of resin, incense, and something metallic, like old blood. Inside lay the mummy. But unlike any they had ever seen. The wrappings were blackened and burned, the fabric fused to the body beneath as if fire had consumed him in death. Across his chest rested an intricate amulet, a golden eye, surrounded by concentric rings of lapis and obsidian. Ahmed whispered, almost reverently, "The Eye of Shadows." Evelyn frowned. "I've never read about it." "You wouldn't have," Ahmed replied gravely. "It was erased from every text. The priests feared it, they said it gave the pharaoh dominion over both life and death." Her pulse quickened. If that's true, that would explain why they tried to bury him and his name. Ahmed stared at her, his voice low. Or why they feared what he became. As they carefully lifted the amulet from the mummy's chest, the walls trembled again. One of the workers shouted from the passageway, a section of the ceiling had begun to collapse. Dust choked the air as stones crashed around them. "Go!" Evelyn yelled, clutching the amulet tightly. "We have to leave." They raced through the narrow tunnels, the sound of cracking stone following close behind. Finally, bursting into the blinding desert sun, Evelyn gasped for breath, clutching the artifact to her chest. Behind them, the tomb sealed itself in a roar of sand and stone, as though the desert was swallowing it whole once more. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ahmed turned to her, his expression pale and grim. "Evelyn, do you realize what you've done?" She glanced at the amulet in her hand, its surface warm despite the wind. Somewhere in the distance, the call to prayer echoed faintly across the valley. That night, under the starlit sky, Evelyn sat alone at the camp, the amulet resting beside her. She traced the symbols carved into its edges, knowing instinctively that this was only the beginning. In her journal, she wrote, "Tonight we uncovered more than a tomb. We uncovered a warning, and perhaps a curse." Ahmed approached quietly, his lantern casting a soft glow across the sand. "I've been translating more from the tablet," he said, setting a scrap of parchment in front of her. "It says the pharaoh was known as Nebkar, the Shadow King." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Nebkar?" Ahmed nodded slowly. "They believed he attempted to summon divine power, something forbidden. But instead, they say, he opened the way, between worlds." Evelyn shivered despite the warm night air. "So they tried to erase him from history." "Not just erase him," Ahmed corrected softly. "They wanted him forgotten, forever. Because what he unleashed could not be destroyed." The desert wind howled, carrying whispers across the dunes like voices from another time. The next morning, as the sun painted the cliffs in shades of amber and gold, Evelyn stood on the edge of the Valley of the Kings. The weight of history pressed upon her shoulders. She had come here to uncover the past. But what she found was a reminder. Some secrets are buried for a reason. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed. As the camera of time slowly pulls away, the valley sleeps once more, silent, ancient, and eternal. Yet beneath the sands, shadows still stir. Waiting. Watching. And remembering.